Good evening. Lovely to see you all again. It's doesn't seem that long since we've seen each other. Right, apologies.
So we have apologies this evening from Councillors Blackwell, Corley, Gardner and Slade.
Thank you. Members' interest, sorry. Yeah, members' interest.
Thank you, Chair. Yep, I am the ward member for Scrutiny.
Thank you, Chair. Ward member for Bury and a trustee for the Ramsey Community Centre, which is, where are we? K.
Yeah, I'm just, I'm not, it's not my ward that's affected, but I am obviously a member for Huntingdon, and my children have played for Huntingdonshire Cricket Club in the past.
It's not actually on the proposals, but I'm ward member for Yaxley. It is mentioned in the report.
Okay.
Okay, item 2. Panel is to discuss the call-in of the Community Infrastructure Levy Spend Allocation Report. Well, obviously, Becky's going to just give, we're trying to make this easy so everybody understands complete process and transparency, and I'll pass you over to Becky now.
So the officers and Councillor Wakeford are here to present the item this evening. We will be looking at it in several parts, starting with a discussion on the updates on delivery in relation to the projects previously allocated or in receipt of SIL funding, and then we will discuss each application individually as they appear in the appendices submitted within the call-in report. So as we come to each application, we will say this is going to be, for example, Hilton Pavilion is the first one, and that way anybody who has an interest in the item in that particular appendix will have the opportunity to leave the room and then return at the end of that appendix, and we'll move on to the next application if that hopefully will make for a smooth sailing through the item, if that's okay. I think.
Is that clear? Has everyone got that? Okay, excellent. Okay, well, without further ado, let's start. And in fact, the first one is in fact Hilton Pavilion.
Well, I think.
Sorry.
Officers
Apologies.
and the Executive Council.
My apologies. Yes.
Good evening, Chair and colleagues. I do admire the focus on speed, Chair. But yes, thank you for calling us up. One efficiency too many, possibly doing without the three of us. As you've rightly noted, Chair, I'm not Councillor Sanderson. I'm not even going to try and fill his shoes this evening, not least because they are several sizes too big for me. I'm about a head too short as well. But Councillor Sanderson is away. He'd managed to plan his family holidays around scheduled meetings, but of course this additional one took us rather by surprise, so I'm standing in for him. You've got the paperwork in front of you. You will be pleased, I think, that I'm not proposing to rehearse everything he's said to you last time he presented it, or rehearse what he said to Cabinet when we discussed it subsequently. Suffice to say, clearly you have the report, you have the information in front of you. You did discuss it originally. Cabinet discussed it at significant length, as you may have seen from the recorded live stream, but the notes of the discussion are included, I think, helpfully fully in, is it Appendix 4 as well, in case you missed the stream. Cabinet took the decision as you see. We know there's been a call-in, as you've flagged, and is the reason that we're meeting here this evening. A significant part of that sounds, from our point of view, as to have been around a desire to have discussed some of this more fully, which clearly you've got procedural opportunity to do this evening. I would certainly urge, and you may similarly, Chair, that if there are actually factors that colleagues feel Cabinet erred in not considering fundamental points of correct application of policy that you feel Cabinet missed or got wrong, please articulate those as clearly as possible, because on the face of it, a fuller discussion this evening doesn't have any bearing on a decision Cabinet has already made, unless, of course, you're raising fundamentally new things that are material. And, of course, that's a fairly narrow target, because we're only considering applications based on what has been submitted with them. So happy to be of what assistance I can be this evening. Possibly more assistance may be provided by able officers and one or two up on the top table as well. But I'm very happy to leave it there by way of introduction from our end, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you for the introduction. I'm sure the members will articulate any issues. Without further ado, shall we go through the list? Oh, Councillor Wells.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I wonder whether before going on to specific applications, it would be just worth considering a few points which I thought of about the overall picture. So there are concerns about the proportion of declined applications in the set. So there's a very high proportion of declined ones. I wonder what can be done to improve the situation going forward from all parties, really, district, town, etc., of parishes. And what is an acceptable level of community support? How do we measure an acceptable level of community support? And how is that evaluated? And thirdly and finally, what criteria are used to assess the risk of vandalism in the context of applications? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we're all noting your questions at some pace, Councillor Wells. I suppose I'd just, if I may, Chair, risk of stepping on your toes, reiterate the rationale for being here this evening. I'm conscious there was a discussion last time around the proportion of declined applications. I seem to recall sitting not far away, and Councillor Sanderson spoke to that. Clearly, there were not as many applications as we'd hoped that met the criteria. And I think that's reflected in the officer advice, which was, of course, then taken by Cabinet. What are we doing about it? Well, as, again, Councillor Sanderson's already flagged to you, we are revisiting the SIL process because we think it's reached the end of its useful life in this structure. And we think we need a better one, frankly. And the other points you raise around community support and specific around vandalism risk, I think those are I'd turn to officer colleagues around me if they wish to add anything. But I suppose I struggle to see the bearing on the applications we have before us this evening. But we are, of course, considering these factors as part of the new SIL review.
Thank you. I think Councillor Wakeford makes a good point. We touched on this the last time in terms of the proportion of applications. And of course, the call-in is actually to discuss a lot of the issues that were perhaps not fully aired at the time. So I think these are useful comments to make, Councillor Wells. And I think that it is useful to take those into account, but obviously the point for tonight's meeting is obviously to discuss and focus specifically on what we've said in terms of the review of the documents. Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. One of the key bits of additional information that we now have that we didn't have at the time that Cabinet got is obviously the extra information in regards to the number of applications that have been put in, how many have been rejected, and also the growth within the area. One of the things that I saw from the Cabinet meeting was that there was a lot of discussion about previous growth, supporting previous growth. But the way that I read it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that it's also, this SIL funding is also to promote future growth as well. That's the way that I read into it. I might be wrong, and I'm happy to be correct if that's the case. But that added information that Cabinet received, this committee didn't receive, I think might have changed the discussion of which we had at the original overview and scrutiny. So that's another reason why I think that this meeting is important to have. And I appreciate, Councillor Wakeford, the position that you've got coming into this meeting, but there is added information that we didn't have last time that I think is important and is a discussion point that we will be having throughout this meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. At risk of pressing you, Councillor, I suppose I'd ask, in what way do you think it would have influenced the discussion, or rather, what does it shed light upon that you feel suggests something defective in how Cabinet took their decision? Because, of course, you are absolutely right, and I defer to experts around me, that this is fundamentally around unlocking growth. It's not a retrospective exercise, and there is no part of the SIL policy that our administration inherited that states that SIL needs to be evenly spread as a function of previous awards and filling in the gaps. So as I recall from that meeting, there was a suggestion that would be interesting information to have, and so it was supplied to Cabinet. But I don't see that it's significantly material to the decision Cabinet took, or to any views you might wish to offer revisiting the applications. But I certainly invite planning colleagues to confirm or clarify, elucidate perhaps what I've said around the purpose of SIL, just because it might be helpful for us to have that underlined really clearly for purpose of the rest of the discussion this evening.
Thank you, Councillor Wakeford. And through you, Chair, absolutely the purpose of SIL is to unlock growth. That is the backbone of SIL. It's why we collect it, and that's its intention and how we spend it. When you look at the list of projects that we would call district-wide projects, for example, in other words, their reach is beyond the immediate local scenario, they are all linked to growth. Now, in some cases, I will be honest with you, that they are part of negotiations. So, for example, where you'll have seen the special education needs school at Alconbury, for example. Well, clearly at the time when we were negotiating Alconbury, we secured land for that, working alongside members and with the community and with partners as well. The follow-on conversation was about then ensuring that that school could be delivered, but proportionate. Our contribution was proportionate to the likely emerging needs of our district. So in other words, we didn't fund special education needs for the wider geography, but rather proportionately. So we secured the land. It didn't meet the threshold of securing it through Section 106. But working with partners, we used SIL in that regard. But fundamentally, the backbone of that was still linked to growth. It's still children that will have a future need for special education needs in our district. So that's just one example. And that's an example of where SIL has been used preemptively, knowing that growth is coming. So to the substantive question, is it linked to growth, to future growth? Yes. That is the premise for SIL and how we award SIL spend, I should say.
Thank you, Clara. Councillor Corney.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a question, but I think it's probably equally as important. So I called it in. I know I'm quite, I'm sort of quite happy to say that. And I think the reason, I think it's probably important that we probably get that out there as well. The reason why we called it in, because we're all here tonight to sort of discuss it as well, aren't we? But I think historically, and I think with what Councillor Wakeford's saying about I think we all accept that this needs a refresh. It does need we all know that, and it's something. Hopefully, something what we do tonight can feed into that refresh and and help the process a little bit. For when it's coming to us later in the summer, isn't it? The paper for that, but historically, and just because it happened previously doesn't mean moving forwards. It's maybe this will change, but historically we always went through each application at scrutiny, and I think those the applicants that certainly got in touch with myself felt that because they wasn't discussed, they felt that process hadn't been carried through. So I think it's quite important that they felt that they had their moment, and then that's the reason the rationale behind my calling anyway, certainly. So I felt it's quite important we say that. But just a question to follow on Councillor Wells, actually, I know, which is pretty much very much similar to the question that I raised on the evening. But it's if we know we're going for this the refresh, we've got all these these applications being declined. We know we're going for the refresh. At the moment, should we really be sort of maybe making those decisions, or if they're ever they're going to be declined, should we not be not deferring, because deferring is a horrible word, isn't it, for us, and when it comes to planning? But I'm just sort of thinking that we'll do sort of take part in applications with various funding grants and in our life as a councillor on many different fronts. Lots of them rely on match funding, and all these applications that are going to be declined now, maybe potentially in 6 months' time, may take a different view on them. But we may have damaged that application. I'm not saying we have, but potentially from a match funding point of view, it might knock something out of kilter further down, within an application with a grant from somewhere else. I just probably may be a bit wordy, but I think I'm getting some nods, so I'm thinking hopefully you're getting what I'm trying to get to.
Yes, far be it from me to criticise anyone for being wordy, Councillor Corney. So you're safe on that front. Respectfully, I think I appreciate the clear articulation you've given there of the rationale, which reflects what I read from your and colleagues' call-in requests. I would say, though, the decision Cabinet was taking was on whether to approve or decline a number of specific bids. It wasn't a general discussion piece around what would we like out of a new SIL process, or what input do we wish to make. The practical upshot of calling in a decision to reject a number of bids because they didn't meet the criteria and approve a couple has been to delay our ability to pass the money to the successful applicants. I would entirely respect the input of this scrutiny panel with respect to advice it might wish to give around new SIL processes. I think we've indicated that we'd intend to come to the panel anyway in the near future with a revised SIL process for scrutiny comment. But I really would underline that we do owe it to applicants to make a decision either way on their applications. I invite officers to comment otherwise, but I think leaving a number of applications hanging, on an ongoing deferral would be, I don't understand what that would mean in practice. It sounds like it would create a significant workload implication if we were suggesting a number of applications were somehow still live. There is no damage to a bid because it can, in a future SIL round, bids can be resubmitted. We've had, different iterations of a number of these applications, come forward at different points. I think we're on application number 3 for one of the projects. I may have done the same as you, Councillor Corney, in terms of speaking around the issue, and I see Clara is ready to step in, so I'll let her add.
Thank you. If we look back over the years in which we've been awarding SIL, we've tried many different permutations, and dare I say there have been times that we did allow applications to be deferred. However, to your substantive point, circumstances changed. And sometimes that created more complexities. So the scenario evolved that it was approve or decline, recognising that there is nothing to stop people coming back into future SIL rounds themselves, dare I say, taking away the feedback from why they were unsuccessful and then reshaping that narrative for a future SIL round. As part of our SIL governance, though, as well, we do have the exceptions rule. So if somebody did come to us where there was absolute funding on the table and we couldn't include it in a live round, we do have opportunities to bring it back through to Cabinet as an emergency decision. So if somebody did absolutely come to Cabinet and present to them that they were in danger of losing funding, we have mechanisms with which we can explore that. And we have done that previously. So with that in mind, it does pick up Councillor Wakeford's point that it sets out clarity. They have clarity, they've got feedback, and it does not prejudice any future submission for SIL funding in line with the SIL guidance that is prevailing at the time of that funding. And that's why I make that point, in particular with the conversation tonight about emerging SIL guidance or potential changes. We don't have those before us, so dare I say, it should be against the prevailing guidance. And as we know historically, we have reviewed SIL governance on at least 2 occasions ourselves. So the idea of it being reviewed again is not at odds with how we have looked at SIL governance since we adopted SIL in 2012.
Thank you, Clara. on that last issue you mentioned about emergency submissions, is that fairly widely publicised?
Yes, it's part of our published SIL guidance.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question for Clara on that last point, actually. How much, you talk about feedback being given, how much feedback is given to the unsuccessful applicants? Is it given to all of them or just those that ask for it?
So we do reply and decline. Dare I say, in most cases, we have some parishes who are probably very good at reaching out and asking for that feedback. We have others that perhaps don't look for the same level of feedback. So dare I say, we do tend to respond in accordance with with the parish and their request, dare I say. We do try to offer some level of feedback, but sometimes what we do find is the person who submitted the bid isn't the person who prepared the bid. So with that in mind then, but we are available at any time for parishes to be able to come to us and ask any questions.
Mike.
Through yourself, Chair, and to supplement Clara's point, clearly the reports that are there that went to scrutiny before and to Cabinet are out there with the feedback on the various bids, and any of the comments that members have made is also available online for people to watch. So recounting what happened at Cabinet, there were a couple of comments that were made of, along the lines of, we'd quite like to support this, but based on the information before us and the application before us at this time, we can't. So again, there's a lot of feedback avenues for people to pick up on should they wish.
Thank you. And just briefly, Chair, of course, we only have one of the relevant council officers on this. Colleagues can only be in one place at once. And I think I'd just flag the resource constraint as well. We would love to be able to give absolutely Rolls-Royce detailed individual feedback discussion at the same time as making improved new processes happen at pace. I think we have to bear in mind the resource constraint we have around what is what is a reasonable use of officer time in order to provide feedback. And as Mike has suggested, there is, of course, information in the public domain already.
Thank you, Councillor Wickford. I think we all recognise the pressures that planning are in generally anyway, and I know you always, your department goes out of its way to help, Clara, so I recognise that. Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. We've touched on growth, and I just wondered if you could provide a bit more clarity about how that growth is assessed. Are there different rates applied for urban areas versus rural areas at all?
I'll start and then I'll invite Ro. Ro is actually the front line in doing a lot of the assessments. But essentially the starting point is there growth? Yeah. We then have a look at the size of the settlement, for example, the quantum of growth they're taking, but we look at it too relative to the size of the ask. So there isn't any kind of one size that fits all, but the starting point is it growth? We can also then work with parishes where it may not be growth in the sense of SIL, but if they've got questions beyond that, we can work with them in the themes of, for example, enabling development. But when it comes to the assessment, the first thing we ask ourselves, is it growth? If it's not growth, it doesn't pass go at that point, to be honest. I'll invite Ro to add.
So when we're looking at the data for growth, we look at the completions from the AMR. So we look at that and we don't just base it on that that particular area, so it could affect surrounding areas as well. So we do take that into account as well. And there's also a question on the application form about growth. So we've got the applicants got an opportunity to talk to us about it. We take the data and we look at it geographically as well.
Councillor Howell.
Thank you. Neighbourhood plans are mentioned several times in the document. What benefit does a neighbourhood plan have for a SIL application?
Well, I would say it's not necessarily about whether it has a neighbourhood plan or not, which deems success. It comes back to Rose's substantive point about how we collect data. And inside, though, I should say in any event, parishes that have adopted neighbourhood plans get 25% of SIL receipts in any event, whereas those that don't get 15%. So what I would say is where a neighbourhood plan is proposing growth in line with its own neighbourhood plan, or dare I say our local plan, or it comes back to that word growth, we will look at it, but then assess it based on the evidence-led approaches Rowena set out.
Okay, are there any other questions before we actually, yes, Councillor Harvey.
In the same sort of vein as you've got the rates of growth that you're looking at, when it comes to the limits for the amount of SIL funding that's asked for, do you take, I've seen some with the same high sort of amounts approved, whereas others with a similar amount declined, and the same with the percentage of the total cost. Is there an actual limit that you apply to each application, or is it just a case-by-case basis?
I would say it's a case-by-case basis. Clearly, we've got the two categories at the moment, the up to 50,000 and then the above 50,000. But then using a wide range of data, not limited to just that Ro has set out, but looking at data more broadly. And again, dare I say, the value for money aspect in terms of the betterment that can be achieved through SIL investment, that's all taken into consideration across the board. But there isn't a scenario whereby that it's based on the size of the parish or the quantum of the ask per se, without looking at that wider evidence base.
Okay, are there any more general questions before we start looking at any detailed applications before we move on? Okay. No, thank you. So the first one on the list is Hilton Pavilion. There are no questions about the recommendation. Everyone happy with that? Okay. Moving on to the next one, application for Sautrey Pavilion. Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Just have a question regarding the, so it's been approved subject to. Could you enlighten me on what the Elizabeth II Trust is? So it says under B, confirmation of works are permissible under the Elizabeth II Trust. Could you just clarify what that is?
It is a trust that's a national trust, and it actually supports that area. So just doing a search, you can find it coming up, and it supports the area but also protects the area. So I haven't got much more information than that, but they're involved with protecting that specific area, so they would have to be involved in anything that goes on that site.
Okay, we can move on to the guardroom community at Bury. Are there any comments about that? Are we happy with that?
Thank you very much, Chair. So this one is probably the main one that I would want to discuss. I think in the Cabinet meeting, it was quite clear that in general, it's very supportive of this idea, and I am as well. I think that there's a lot of opportunity in this site. And the application from what we've got, obviously, is just a very short summary. Seems very straightforward. I know it is a lot of money that they're asking for. It's a high percentage. But in general, it's an unused building that's quite historic in the area. And what they're suggesting to do, having a museum, council office, hot desking, meeting facilities, bistro, they're looking to cram in a lot into that one area. And I think that what is in front of us does show an unlocking of growth, trying to build the area, trying to draw people in. I know in Cabinet it mentioned about some concerns around commercial use of the building. So my first question is to Clara and the officers is there a limit, or are we prevented to give money to a project that is for commercial purposes?
I think the question before us here isn't about necessarily about the commercial purposes here, because there's quite an element of community. The question is the demonstration that the viability of what's being proposed for the long-term betterment of the community. So to your substantive question, do we invest in commercial businesses? I would actually say what we need to look at is about still being used for the infrastructure that can support business. In that scenario, I don't think that that's necessarily something that can't be considered. In fact, we would support it. But what needs to lie underneath is the viability of the business, but also that social value output as a result of our investment needs to be quantified. And I think, in summary, that isn't what's before us inside this bid. So I think that's why you saw a lot of positive conversations at Cabinet. But looking at the officer assessment in front of you, the concern being it's an enormous amount of money, that business plan perhaps hasn't demonstrated that economic output for the betterment of the community to justify an investment of this scale. But dare I say, we do absolutely recognise, as per the report, the level of growth that Bury has taken. And for that reason, that's why I come back to the substantive point earlier, that there is no prejudice to anybody to come back with a business case at a later date. But we would absolutely encourage still bids to focus on the infrastructure element of what they're looking to deliver, and as part of the business case, then amplify that economic output that shows betterment for them and the community in particular.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you for that. Thank you for that answer. One, I guess, is more of a process for this committee, and then I have got another question. I think what would be useful, I don't know whether it's for this meeting or for future meetings, is if the officers can give an overview of the project before we ask the questions, because I'm sure Clara could have answered that question in their introduction, so I might not have asked that question. But so what I'm looking at is, we're all very much in favour of this, or we seem to be in favour of the idea of this project. We think it's a good idea. I do think it will unlock growth. So I'm sure, like many people on this committee, we've had the parish councils calling us up and talking to us about their different applications. And it's my understanding that a business plan did go in with this application. So was that received, and was that not sufficient to prove the business case? Was that not sufficient to prove that this is a viable project for the community? I guess that's the second question.
I think one thing we need to be mindful tonight is that it isn't in the public domain necessarily, or I'm very mindful of the commercial sensitivity of business plans that get put to us. And this wouldn't be the forum to have an open dialogue about figures that were submitted to us. But what I do come back to is perhaps, and I'll invite Councillor Wakeford perhaps to add the cabinet dimension here. But one of the questions we do need to ask ourselves, and perhaps as per the officer report didn't come forward, was that this is money that's brought in through development to be invested into the community more broadly. We do need to satisfy ourselves too that where we are supporting economic development, that it survives for the longer term. And I would suggest that that's the bit that hasn't been amplified inside the report. So coming back to your question, was there a plan? To a degree, yes. But however, as per the report, it didn't reach the threshold of satisfying us that investing that amount of money gained through development into one single enterprise, it didn't demonstrate to us that that would be a wise investment at this time. Dare I say that they, as officers, there were elements of this as well that we would probably weight more in favour of than others. But given the commercial sensitivity of some of the figures that would be included, that wouldn't be a conversation to be held in a public forum tonight.
Councillor.
Yes, Councillor.
Thank you. And just on an earlier comment around how it would have been useful to present an overview, I mean, respectfully, I would just remind councillors that you've already had a presentation of the reports here. You've also had a detailed cabinet discussion, which has been open to you to attend or watch online, but also to read the detailed summary of included in the papers for this evening. As I outlined at the beginning, I wasn't proposing that we'd repeat everything we'd said to date. I would suggest that was appropriate. I think if councillors have factual understanding questions around what's in the paperwork, that there have been multiple opportunities to raise those. I'm happy that the fact that this meeting is taking place is enabling further clarity around understanding of aspects of the SIL policy. But as I said up front, and I'd reiterate, and I will continue to do so this evening if necessary, I really would urge that we either identify anything that calls into question the cabinet decision, such as to justify revisiting it, or that we reflect on whether this is an appropriate use of a call-in. I will stop there, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whitford. I think you do make a good point, and I have actually observed that as we've gone through this, we're actually looking at individual applications, rightly so. But is that the issue? Because Clara and Ren effectively are giving us a complete rundown on why they were actually all refused. Whether this is the right forum to do that, and whether we could take that offline and be more effective use of our time might be better. So I think we all certainly need to express views and concerns, and I think there's some very valid points have actually been raised, but I'm not sure this is adding a huge amount of value at the moment, going through every single one and actually asking why did this happen, and the business case would have been put back. Councillor Martin.
I'm sorry, Chair, but to some extent I disagree with what Councillor Wakeford said and what you've just said there, because at the last Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and one of the reasons why this has been called in was because these weren't discussed on an item-by-item basis. So this committee hasn't received an overview from officers. We've received the report, and that's useful, but sometimes there's added information that you can give outside of what's written on this report, because this is just a very brief overview. I'm sure officers can provide a little bit more information that is currently on the piece of paper, and whether this is a useful piece of time. The last meeting, we didn't discuss this on an individual basis, which was agreed at the start of the meeting. So I think that this is a useful use of a call-in, because we didn't discuss it on an item-by-item basis last time. That is what we're doing this time, which is great, it's fantastic, and I completely agree with you. Some of the items that we're raising, if they were raised last time, would have been completely fine. It's just that we're raising it in a call-in rather than in the usual meeting. But this committee has not received an overview from officers other than the piece of paper that's in front of us on each of the items, because that was skipped at the last meeting. For whatever reason, I'm not going into the reasons why it was done, but it happened, and we've got to move past that. But that's why we're calling it in. Now, the outcome may not change. I completely accept that. And we may agree or disagree on individual items. But I think it's important that this Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and any Overview and Scrutiny Committee, has the opportunity to discuss any item that they wish to and give their full comments to the Cabinet for them to make their decision, because that is our role. If we do not do that, then this Council is lacking in the Overview and Scrutiny process. We're not scrutinising, we're not passing on comments. So any comments of this is a waste of time, this isn't useful for any of our time, I think is completely wrong. And it should stop now, because this is a perfect use of this council's time, because we are giving our views to a decision that this council's making, which is spending a lot of this council's money, which is our residents' money. So any talk of this being a waste of time, I think, is completely and utterly wrong.
Through yourself, Chair, hearing the comments of both members and respecting those, I do come back to 2 points, really. One, the assessments that were available to scrutiny and subsequently to Cabinet are the summaries of the applications that we have assessed as officers. And those details have not changed in the intervening period. And ultimately, there may be factors that members may or may not be aware of on each one of the applications. But ultimately, we as officers have to present a recommendation based on our established SIL governance rules, and that is based upon the details that are provided with the application. So coming back to the point, there may be ifs, buts and maybes and questions we all have in our and views that we all have in our own minds on, for example, the guard room, about, actually, can we not get this over the line? But we have to make a determination based on the evidence that we have before us and the information that we have. I will say that, from the point of view in terms of discussion of the individual items at scrutiny, yes, there was a bit of an oddity, let's call it that, and clearly that is one element of the call-in, and that's why it's here this evening. However, I do accept Councillor Wakeford's point as well, that there are comments within the detailed and comprehensive notes that have been prepared by Democratic Services that set out the rationale of the points that members did note as part of the presentation that's been before us. So it's not the point that Clara and the team are here to present or represent each of the individual items that are before us. I think so. Putting the point aside as to whether this is an efficient use of time, it is about understanding whether there are any comments on each of the individual applications where, as Councillor Wakeford has said, there is a procedural failing or a procedural issue which requires redetermination by the Cabinet or not, ultimately is the test. Any wider points than that, yes, are there for noting and are there for general information purposes only, and for kind of the wider awareness of anybody sitting at home watching this online. But fundamentally, unless there is a procedural issue that has been identified on a particular item, that is the ultimate test for this committee.
Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. And I would like to reassure Councillor Martin as well. He says this committee has a right to have its observations considered by Cabinet. Indeed, it does. And that's why it's important that we have a scrutiny panel. And I've sat on this previously before I was a Cabinet member. But as I think Mike has alluded to, of course, I'd respectfully remind colleagues that that opportunity did exist previously. I appreciate what's been said around throwing off members from their stride, perhaps. But the item did close with an invitation to members to ask anything that was outstanding. Is there anything else anybody wanted to ask? And as ever, in any context, and I bring enough reports here to this particular scrutiny panel, if there is ever anything on which members feel that they need fuller information and understanding about, they should feel free to ask. We aren't. There is always a balance to strike between how much detail to present, how much to assume around members having read papers in their packs, what you signpost. If members ever feel that there is more information that they need, they should be encouraged to raise that. But of course, raising that at the earliest opportunity is helpful. So if there's factual background, it's perfectly appropriate to drop a line in advance of a scrutiny panel as well. You needn't save up detailed factual questions to run through at a meeting. So I hope that's reassurance as to the importance that Cabinet certainly places in scrutiny as a process and respecting the view of this panel.
Thank you, Councillor Wickford. And I'm sure we all take some comfort that we actually can add some value. Councillor Martin.
No, I think I've said enough for the time being. I'll let somebody else talk.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. I know that this particular application and actually one or two others as well have said that the project doesn't have planning permission. Is that something that has to be in place before a SIL application? Can they be going through that process when they apply for SIL funding?
No, it doesn't have to be in place. So we can make the funding subject to planning permission being in place. The thing that we always have to be aware of is if the planning permission isn't in place, then the plans may change and the cost can go up. So it doesn't have to be in place. It's just one of the sustainability things we like to know.
Particularly if there aren't any other specific comments on this application, may I just underline, as has already been flagged to the committee, of course, that Cabinet were extremely disappointed that the application coming forward here clearly didn't meet the criteria as set out because, as I think I may have said personally at the meeting, certainly as Cabinet colleagues said, it certainly feels like there is a strong application that could potentially be made. We'd encourage an application to be brought forward in due course on this site. I think a lot of the factors that have been alluded to by colleagues are real there, but we are, as we've said, considering applications on the basis of the information that's submitted, and of course there is a long list of reasons that Cabinet drew attention to in discussion of this item in Appendix 4, number 3 in the extract, from Roman I to Roman X, and so those would be reasons that they might be advised to revisiting, considering coming forward with a future application.
Briefly, Chair, I mean, that's the third time, Councillor Wakeford, you've mentioned Appendix 4. And I think my problem here is that actually there is no evidence in Appendix 4 of this wide-ranging discussion that Cabinet's had and how it's mindful to be favourable to this item, because Appendix 4 just reiterates from Roman I to Roman X the points that the officers have made in their analysis. There's no fresh input from the Cabinet that could be seen here.
I don't know how much longer Councillor Jennings would like Cabinet minutes to be recorded as. This is recording the decision that we took, the clear rationale. I think that gives clarity to members. The meeting was in public. It was recorded. As we've said a number of times, we are disappointed to have made the decision that we have. We don't reject applications happily. And Councillor Jennings is suggesting that we consider how to additionally reflect that in minutes going forward. In all sincerity, I say we will take that away and reflect on it and how we might appropriately pick that up, at risk of making them even more heavy and lengthy. But I'm happy to commit we'll take that back, and I'll pick it up with Councillor Sanderson and officer colleagues.
Thank you. Are there any other, Councillor Corney?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's probably quite important as well. We need to park as the oddity. I think it's probably a good description. I mean, because categorically that wasn't part of the call-in. I think the only link to the call-in probably was the fact that maybe it stifled debate a little bit, and some of the things that we're talking about now may have come out within the meeting. I think that's probably fair to say. I think on this one, it's really good that within Bury, it's noticed, and it's actually, Clara, you brought it up about the amount of growth that Bury's taken. I mean, it's actually tripled in size. I think by the time everything that's coming through is built out, I mean, it's taken a really big hit, and I think that's really important. That's reflected. But then I think as part of that growth, where the guard room is situated, this site has been bounced along for as long as I've been a councillor. It's been years, isn't it? The Upward site as a whole, but it's only within very recently that this particular building has been offered to the parish council, which I think and this probably would have come out in the original meeting prior to going to cabinet. But some of the points made about the building is not owned yet by the parish. Maybe that could be explained a little bit more. That probably would have been teased out a little bit. The fact that it was it's only just come forward, as the developers often only just offered it. It's not mentioned in the parish comments on recent plan applications until this year. Again, that's another reason why, is because it's explaining itself, and maybe that detail would have they're the comments that maybe we would have teased out that would have gone to. I'm not suggesting that they may not have made a great deal of difference at cabinet, and it's good to hear that that there was and obviously see as well that there was an appetite to push this forward, but. At the same time, I suppose a question, I should bring it out into a question. Once this is done, do we actually go back to the applicants? If it's, just sort of say, well, this is a report that's going to go forward. Have we got anything, is it worded badly? Do you feel that you could add anything to this before it goes any further? I don't know, does that happen?
Respectfully, and I mean that sincerely, because I like and respect Councillor Corney enormously. I think we've spoken to that this evening. I think we've underlined as well that this is, of course, in the public domain. If applicants are putting time and effort into putting in applications, I hope it's not unreasonable to imagine that they might take the little extra time to then digest the notes and feedback, because it makes best use of their time in order to bring back a further application that actually addresses a lot of this, because as we've all said, there's an awful lot of growth, and it feels like they should be capable of bringing something forward that's stronger. I'm sure local members will be able to assist in signposting them to what we said, to what's in the reports, on top of what Clara and Mike have both commented on that. So happy to repeat if necessary, but I think we've, Chair, I think we've spoken to that tonight.
Can we? I'm very conscious that we're getting stuck in a bit of a rut. I'd like to either move things along. I think the points very clearly been made about the feedback from this committee, and it hasn't gone perhaps as fully to cabinet as it perhaps it should have done because of the circumstances. And I think that's on board, Councillor Corney. But, so I'd like to actually be able to get something out of this to actually make some either recommendations or we agree with this or come up with something. Yes, sorry, Councillor Corney.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for indulging me. I think that's the whole point of the call, isn't it? Because we didn't do it. I think we are trying to tease these points out. Yes, I think we all appreciate that it's gone through cabinet. It's not not going to change the fact, but to get those points out, to learn from it, we have to have that discussion, don't we? And surely that's the whole point of all of us being here.
I think we all recognise we all actually contribute hugely and want to take this forward. Councillor Wakeford.
Yes, thank you, and we do all recognise that, Chair. I just hope that colleagues do appreciate from our point of view, and in fact from I know the previous administration's point of view, because I know what colleagues of theirs certainly said to me when I called a civil decision in some years ago around the appropriateness of doing that. I think it's important that we understand that the call-in process is quite weighty, is not used lightly, and is not used where there is not a reasonable prospect that anybody can identify of a need to revisit a decision, because there are different ways of providing feedback and having further discussions, not least through task and finish if you want to do that formally as a scrutiny panel. But the effect of formally calling in a decision is that you're withdrawing something that has otherwise been taken, is about to take effect, and that has a bearing in delaying its ability to do so. I am all ears. We are all ears for the remainder of discussion this evening. But I hope it's not unfair to say I don't think I've heard anything so far that would give us reason to believe that actually there is any rationale for Cabinet to need to re-meet and rediscuss and to consider a different decision on these. But we have several items left, so I will stop there, Chair, and let us progress with them.
Thank you. Can we move on to the next item? Okay, so it's at Nate's Fire Station. Okay, thank you. Moving on again, it's Abbey College. Oh, Councillor Cornell.
I say completely missed. I should have declared that this is obviously within my ward. I think as a comment, had we got into the comments on the evening on this, I mean, just to make a point, I think this could be as a generic comment. To be fair, for every application that do nothing about this application coming in. I like to think I'm active in Ramsey, maybe applicants maybe should reach out to their ward members to say that they're putting applications in. I think it's probably a good opportunity to say this, because then we could be on board a little bit and help out a bit. But we knew nothing about this at all until it came through in the papers, which I thought was quite a shame, really. But just a comment.
Okay, thank you for that. Folksworth. No comments. No comments. Thank you. Okay. The next one is War Boys, New Parish. No comments. Thank you. King George V Pavilion. Oh, sorry if I missed one. Workshop. Oh, no, War Boys. That's fine. Yeah. King George Parish Pavilion. Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. As a keen cricket fan, I'm keen to see development of cricket across the district. I suppose the first bullet point, interesting lack of evidence for need for this and links to growth, is the one that sort of struck me. So the playing pitch and outdoor sports strategy refers to the hunting and cricket facilities as having capacity for further teams. The strategy has a recommendation to consider options to increase and improve stock of suitable practice facilities, first and foremost focusing on the King George V playing fields at St Peter's Road and 2 other locations in the district. But I understand that currently no teams are able to play there due to a lack of facilities, and so the site is falling into the disused sites category. The Cabinet meeting, I think Councillor Taylor mentioned youth initiatives such as the All-Stars and the Dynamos, and obviously without available facilities, these initiatives can't run, but it's likely to be a key priority for the club once it is able to offer these again, as no club can survive without new members. Thank you, Chair. So that's really just an observation, but it does refer to the first bullet point, which is very, generic, and I wonder whether officers might want to comment on that. Thank you.
Are you suggesting that those comments weren't actually made available? Is that?
No, I'm simply saying the first bullet point, lack of evidence of need for this, just doesn't seem to ring true from what I've understood. Thank you.
Thank you. May I just share? We've been too still, colleagues. As my ward covers Huntingdon, though I'm not a member of the Town Council, I did step out of the Cabinet discussion on this particular item for appearance's sake. I didn't wish to be involved in formally taking a decision that could be seen to benefit my ward, but I'm remaining in here now in the discussion of this, having taken advice on the grounds really that I'm here representing to you the Cabinet paper and speaking on behalf of Cabinet rather than taking a decision there. So I trust colleagues are content with that, but just to reassure, that's not an omission on my part.
Thank you. Extension of the footpath in Colne. Any comments? No. Thank you. Community centre extension in Ramsey. Yes, thank you. Are there any comments on that members want to raise? No. Okay. Thank you. Bless him. Sorry. Bless. Goodness gracious. Yeah. I'll wait till he gets back.
We could have asked that before he got up.
Yeah. Quite. Application for MagPass internal refit. Are there any comments or questions on that? No. Okay. Are there any other comments or observation that members or anyone else would like to make? No. Okay.
I think Sam might actually.
Councillor Wakeford.
Thank you. On Councillor Sanderson's behalf, and forgive me, Chair, if we've bottomed this out and lack of further comment addresses it, but it would be really helpful to check that I've heard correctly, and for purposes of the minutes, and I dare say for the decision you may need to take shortly, that having had the discussion, and absolutely I respect, as Councillor Corney touched on earlier, and I referenced that there was clearly a being thrown off course somewhat in the last meeting, and I recognise that. But having had the discussion, I don't think I've heard anything material that procedurally challenges the decision Cabinet has made, or anything that should cause Cabinet to need to reconsider this. If I have misheard or missed anything, or if that is not a fair characterisation, I'd find it really helpful to hear that. Forgive me, Chair, if that is precisely what you're about to move on to do. In that case, I'll stop talking.
That's exactly the point I was actually going to make. We've discussed, highlighted some issues, and effectively we're now at the situation, effectively saying, do we want anything referred back to Cabinet for reconsideration?
That's a bit on his page.
Sorry, on the other side as well, actually. And to reconsider the decision within 10 working days. Or if the panel does decide not to refer the matter back to Cabinet, the decision shall take effect from overview and scrutiny at panel meeting. So, colleagues, can I have...
Thank you, Chair. I guess really it's going to come down to, yes, we could argue and say, I don't feel this is right, or, for whatever reason. Equally, I guess, the conversations that we have had, and, we have had some debate on a couple of items. I guess it's whether Cabinet feel that they had everything that they needed at the time. And we can't answer that. I suppose only Cabinet can't they? But, I'm not suggesting that, that's good enough reason to send it back. I don't, but the fact that we didn't get the chance to tease these things out, and we've had a bit of a go at it tonight. That'd be my only point, but.
Thank you, and far be it from me to seek to speak for the whole of Cabinet, diversity of views as it contains, but I think it's fair to say that we took decisions only on the basis that we felt comfortable taking those and that we felt we had sufficient information before us. And my take, I can't channel Councillor Sanderson. My take is that this discussion hasn't fundamentally changed that assessment. I haven't heard anything that I would be wish to be taking forward. I mean, for context, I've made reference to having, I think, if memory serves, the only time I've called in a decision as a councillor on this council. The decision I called in was a SIL decision. In fact, it was the first or second iteration of the Huntingdon cricket pavilion application, and I wasn't the only one who did. And the rationale that we gave was quite clearly that it at that point had been, as a different application, had been supported by officers. Nothing at Scrutiny had called into question that support. Cabinet didn't appear to call into question the material in front of them, but it was apparent from the Cabinet discussion that they'd come up with some additional criteria that weren't in the SIL policy and were declining funding on that basis. And so a number of us said, well, hang on a minute, I summarised, but it's in the public domain. A decision has been taken at odds with the policy, and we don't understand the procedural compliance of making up extra criteria. That is of the character of the sort of concern I think that I would have expected, I think the Cabinet would have expected, were you to wish to move us forward to a Cabinet discussion. I think it sounds like there's a measure of agreement around the panel, not to try and speak for all of you as well as Cabinet, that you're possibly not in that place. But I hope that's helpful as a response, Councillor Corney. It is, of course, up to the Scrutiny panel to make that decision for yourselves.
Speaking personally, and perhaps for some other members, I think we've all found it very useful to actually express our views, and some sensible concerns were raised in terms of our normal scrutiny process. And I think that lessons were learned, and I think that hopefully that won't happen again, and we will actually resume work. Our processes as normal, and it was very unfortunate. We have discussed things, and it's unfortunate we've got the cart before the horse at the moment. I would have preferred it the other way around. However, we are where we are, which I hate that phrase. On that basis, hopefully we won't have another situation like this again, because I don't think any members do a call-in lightly, frankly. And I think I can say that for both sides in this panel. And I want to thank you all for your contributions and efforts tonight. It's been much appreciated. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Again, without wishing to labour the point, the panel this evening has the two options. One, to identify the particular concerns that that would require, in essence, Cabinet to take the item back, in effect. So if there is a fundamental procedure failing that you've identified, and to be honest, I've not heard one this evening that I'd be happy to kind of to support in terms of that going forward. Or the second point is that you recognise the points that have been made, but do not refer the matter back to Cabinet, and effectively the decisions that have been taken should stand. I think the other point that counts to sort of put the not spin on it, to put the stamp on it in terms of where Cabinet if they felt that they did not have sufficient information before them to reach the decisions that they did, they could have quite legitimately turned around and said, actually, we want to defer the item, defer the paper in its entirety, etc., and ultimately send the item back to ONS at that stage. Clearly, the fact that Cabinet took the decision leads me to conclude that they were comfortable that there was sufficient information before them to make the decision. So, hearing what has been said tonight, I'd just reiterate the point that ultimately, if you are unable to identify the nature and the materiality of any concerns and why that should have led to a differing outcome, then I think that ultimately leads you to where the recommendation of this committee should go in terms of the second option. But ultimately, that is a matter for members. Thank you.
Councillor Pickering.
Yeah, I'm just interested to know really how we've got to this point where there doesn't seem to be any material justification for the call-in. We've got 6 officers here tonight and, all these councillors around the table. There's a significant cost to that. So I'm just wondering really how we've got to this point where we've had a call-in with no significant evidence on the table at all that we can put to say even to the vote. That's my question.
I think actually the processes are such that members are entitled to do the call-in, and we went with recommendations from member services on and followed due process. It's as simple as that.
So a call-in can be made really with no justification on the. I just don't understand how such a weighty process can be called into action really without any significant measure or test of its of its robustness.
Through yourself, Chair, I think just replaying how we got here, and clearly it is available online if you wish to see it. But ultimately, the interjections were around the clarity of which hats were being worn by members at particular times, and how the debate was going, and potentially it was going off on a bit of a tangent. In correcting that course quite correctly, that to some sort of brought an abrupt end to the proceedings and the further discussion, and ultimately members around the table felt sufficiently that the concerns or comments that they would have made hadn't been duly aired. And then that's where the call-in process is, in effect, the only process that is available to formally challenge the subsequent decision of Cabinet. Now, in terms of the nature of that process, the minimum tests were met in terms of the reasons for that call-in, and the required number of members were met. That is set out in due process. And therefore, once that's been triggered and once those hurdles have been overcome, those thresholds have been overcome, hence we're back before us this evening. It is then the outcome of tonight that is limited in terms of where it can go next, i.e. the decision is effectively ratified because this panel decides actually there's nothing more that can be added that would have changed the decision, or a procedural issue can be identified. Or the alternative is, if a procedural issue is identified that Cabinet weren't fully cited on, etc., that then it goes back for Cabinet to then become involved again and re-review that decision. So, in effect, there was the trigger point, the threshold was met, the qualification criteria was met. We've had the discussion and the debate, and ultimately there are 2 courses of action that subsequently follow. So hopefully that explains, Councillor.
Thank you, and if I may chip in as well, again, notionally on Councillor Sanderson's behalf, just to reassure colleagues, in the comments I made around the extent to which this is helpful, appropriate, or I suppose value for money as a call-in, to use Councillor Pickering's language, that's a suggestion about the that's not a suggestion that there's anything procedurally inappropriate, because as Mike has rightly said, subject to a threshold, 3 members of scrutiny panel can call in decisions for reconsideration. It's really a point around whether that's a wise and a politically appropriate judgment around using that. But procedurally, there's no concern from Cabinet side around how we've got here. But I think it is helpful, if having identified that there isn't anything material that does require Cabinet actually to reconsider, that you allow the decision to stand immediately, because that allows us to move forward with implementing the decision and passing the monies to the successful applicants and starting that process, rather than holding off for a Cabinet meeting to be called and timings being kicked off again.
Thank you for comments from everyone on that. I think we've actually reached a natural conclusion, unless there are any other. Councillor Corney, briefly.
Very briefly, Chair, I think it's really important that three parish councils that I'm aware of all felt that we didn't discuss it enough, and I think backing up Councillor Wakeford, I think it's really important that whilst it may not change the decision, I think it's really important that they see due process takes place, and so that's. Whilst you manage your expectations, you say to them, look, but this is the only route available to us. So I'm quite comfortable with I don't see it as a waste. I see it as actually it's almost some sort of a closure, if you like, for those parish councils. But at least they feel that they've had with the due process has taken place. There is, but then it keep.
I think it's the cost of and we're likely to be going down a bit of a rabbit hole. Can we move on to Councillor Wakeford?
Just to, for avoidance of doubt as to Councillor Sanderson's and Cabinet's position, of course, which is that due process was followed and Cabinet took that decision duly with ample evidence of that, as Councillor Jennings rightly says, in more detail on the video recording than in the minutes, as lengthy as they are. But I think you're right as to circularity, Chair. So I'll stop there and have nothing further to add this evening, if you're content to bring to a close.
Okay, I think we've actually aired this fairly well to some conclusion or not. So the decision is, do we let the decision stand? I think that's the view, or not. Can we have some confirmation on that? So that's the panel to decide effectively to not refer the matter back to panel, and the decision will stand. Okay, we've got agreement on that. Thank you for all your comments and contributions tonight. Thank you very much. The meeting is called to a close. Thank you.